Hi, I'm Miriam Green, Director of Marketing and Alumni Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us for today's HU Alumni Association's Porch Talks webinar. The Alumni Association seeks to engage all HU alumni across the United States to foster a lifelong connection to the university and to connect fellow alumni across the country. There are many ways you can get involved with us, from participating in future webinars, attending or hosting an event, and supporting the Alumni Annual Fund. To learn more, please email alumni@afhu.org. And mark your calendars for May 2021 as we celebrate 50 years of the official study abroad program at HU in Jerusalem. More details to come. Our next webinar will be on April 7th and will feature HU alumna Rachel Sarati as we discuss the Holocaust from a third-generation perspective. Today, the professor will be taking questions after the presentation. To submit a question, please type it into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. I'm now pleased to introduce HU alumna Beth Singer. A graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, Beth founded Beth Singer Design to pursue her twin passions of great design and giving back to the community. She's a multi-platform designer leading the firm's work in print, digital, video, and live event spaces. BSC's work has helped raise millions of dollars, change minds, and convert interest into action. Some of the firm's clients include Johns Hopkins University, Hillel, APAC, CVS, and ABC. The design community honored Beth with its prestigious American Institute of Graphic Arts Fellow Award, which recognizes designers who have made a significant contribution to raising the standards of excellence in design practice and conduct. She has served on the national board of AIGA and is a past president of AIGA DC, which she served on its board for 10 years. Beth attended Hebrew University for a semester in 1978, and in a very nice turn of events, later this week, Beth will be going to Israel and HU with her synagogue for the first time since she studied there. Beth, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Well, I am pleased to introduce Professor Vinitzky-Seroussi. Professor Seroussi served as the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences for 4 years, and she was the first woman to hold this position. And now she's the academic director of the Harry Truman Research Institute at Hebrew U in Jerusalem. And her research is fascinating, and I told her that because I saw some of her talks online yesterday, and I think all the participants here are in for a real treat. The research revolves around the issues of collective memory and commemoration, and specifically the ways in which societies as a whole cope with difficult pasts and their histories. She's been published very widely, and I did look up some of her papers, and I want to read you some of the names of the papers just so that you can get a flavor of what she's doing. So one of the papers is called Controlling for Consensus, Commemorating Apartheid in South Africa. Another one is Yitzhak Rabin's Assassination and the Dilemmas of Commemoration. Another one, I find this one personally fascinating, Moving Gender, Home Museums and the Constructions of Their Inhabitants. Another one, A Knock on the Door, Managing Death in the Israeli Defense Forces. And it looks like from the number of papers they're published, she was very interested in this idea of class reunions. And her book, called After Pomp and Circumstance, High School Reunion as an Autobiographical Occasion, was published by Chicago University Press. And she has another more recent book with 2 other colleagues published by Oxford University Press called The Collective Memory Reader. So I am very proud and pleased to present Professor Vinitzky-Seroussi.
Hi, good morning at the other end of the ocean, and I apologize for the time in which you had to wake up and listen to my talk. Thank you, Beth, very much for the very, very generous introduction. I wish my mom could hear you. And thank you, Miriam, for putting all this together. And now all I can do is try not to disappoint you. So let me talk a little bit about what does it take to be remembered. And when I say what does it take to be remembered, I mean socially wise. I'm a sociologist. So in case you were wondering about all kinds of personal issues that have to do with memory, I'm bothered as you are and have nothing smart to say in that direction. Let's take you, and please take a look at the first picture. I assume that most of you recognize this woman, and we all remember her. You know, this is Rosa Parks, who refused to give her seat in Montgomery, Alabama, in a bus to a white man in 1953, and in our minds, she is the collective memory will represent the civil rights movement. But Rosa Parks wasn't really the first woman to do so. In fact, as far as we know, there were at least 2 other women, but she's the one we remember. And we'll return to that example later on. Let me bring up another example. I'm sure you recognize this face. This is, of course, Anne Frank. And around many parts of the world, when we say Holocaust and we ask people to mention a name or two, if they don't have any personal connections, thank God, and they don't know anybody who perished viciously in the Holocaust, usually people would come up with the name of Anne Frank. But we do need to remember that there were 6 other million Jews who were viciously murdered, as well as other, you know, gypsies, homosexuals, and other groups. But we do remember Anne Frank, and I will return to her later on. Let me take you to a more recent issue, the moment where collective memory ends up being a really, really serious issue, because collective memory is not so much an issue of our past. And let me give you a few recent examples. I assume you recognize the statue of General Lee, who was the commander of the South during the civil rights, the war in towards the second part of the 19th century, America, the war between the North and the South. Now, on the right side, my right, is probably your right too, on the right side of the picture, you can see a photograph from a very harsh demonstration that took place on the ground of University of Virginia some 2 years ago around the issue of taking deterring the statue of General Lee. So some really, really extreme right-wing members, including Ku Klux Klan, demonstrated, and on the other side of the road, there was another group, a more liberal group, that demonstrated. And the end of that demonstration around the way we remember our past, a young woman lost her life. If we take a look at this picture, we are reminded, of course, of the Holocaust and of a new Polish law that actually dictates both to Poles as well as to the rest of the world what can and cannot be said about the role the Poles played in World War II and during the Holocaust. And let me take you 2 weeks ago, where we had the World Forum of the Holocaust, marking the 75 year of liberating Auschwitz, and there was this huge worldwide leaders gathering in Jerusalem, headed by our president, Ruby Rivlin, and there was a major controversy about what can be said about the Polish role in the war. Following what happened in that conference, Yad Vashem issued a very, very unique apology in which they said that the kind of narrative they offered during that conference was actually inaccurate. by that is that they enlarge the role played by the Russians versus the role played by Poles and others. I'm leaving to you to get what went behind the scenes that ended up in that. But what I'm trying really to convey, the kind of message I'm trying to convey is that the fact that we care so much about collective memory is because it is not so much about the way we were, but it's really about the way we are, about our identity, about who we are, about what kind of narrative we tell ourselves about ourselves. Now, the story of the impact and the importance of the past is not really new to the history of mankind. This is something that prophets and kings knew forever and ever. But it became really, really critical and prominent towards the end of the 19th century. And what happened at the end of the 19th century? There is nationalism. There is this new entity that we call it the nation. And the nation is a very, very abstract entity. How do we know that you are American? How do I know that I'm an Israeli? And the nation demands some really, really specific and serious issues from each and every citizen. One is that it asks its citizens to pay taxes. This is something that most people don't like to do, and they wonder why do they need to pay to this nation some money. The other side of the requirements made out of most citizens is to kill in its name or to be killed for the nation. And people wondered, why do they need to pay taxes and sometimes, in fact, pay with their own life if they don't really know what the nation is all about? Collective memory became the glue and the story that held all of this together. So what does it take to be remembered? And I would like to present to you in the short talk that we're going to have today, 5 dimensions that needs to be taken very seriously if we want to make sure that something is remembered. If there is a person, an individual, a leader, an artist, someone we do care about, we want to make him or her remembered, what does it take to be remembered? If we want to make sure that a specific event is remembered, what does it take to be remembered? The first dimension, it doesn't mean that it is the most important one, but the first dimension is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, because there was a call coming in. The first dimension is the time. In order to be remembered, it's better to have a formal Memorial Day on our national calendar. For example, America has some days that are Memorial Days, and other days, you know, President Day, and so on. The Israeli calendar, in addition to having the Jewish calendar being nationalized once the State of Israel was born in 1948, added 6 days into the calendar, 4 out of which are Memorial Days. Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers, Memorial Day for the Holocaust and martyrs, Memorial Day for the assassinated Prime Minister Rabin, and Memorial Day for the assassinated Minister of Commerce Rehavam Ze'evi. So having a formal day on the calendar is a major and a very important dimension if we want to make sure that something is remembered. The second dimension is space. The space where we can gather as a society, as a family, as a tribe, as a nation, and around which we can remember. What you can see on the screen is a very, very interesting memorial, a monument that I'm sure most of you have visited. And this is the memorial for the Vietnam veterans in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. in general is a sort of a mecca, or if you wish, and if I can use it for a second, a toy store for people like me, because it's filled with those amazing, extremely interesting monuments. And I try to visit Washington every time I'm on the East Coast in America, and every time I'm there, there is something new. And this something new says something also about America's culture and commitment to the past. The one that you can see here is one of the most interesting and controversial monuments at the time. And it started with the black wall made by Maya Lin, at the time a student at Yale. Later on, there was a lot of protest from veterans who felt that this wall is sort of a wall of shame, black, and so on. So the statues were added, and then the flag and a plaque was added, and then the women pieta was added. So we have this multi-vocal monument. But what I'm trying to convey is the message that the existence of an official space dedicated to a past is a great help to our ability to remember. But we have a third dimension, which is the agents of memory. Agents of memory can come from different dimensions. They can be architects, those who write history books, poets, singers, and so on. Here you can see what I think are one of the most important agents of memory, and those are, and I know that last night you had the Oscar, so we are now working on the next round of memory to be remembered. But after we graduate from high school, most of the kind of history we know comes from either television series or films that are still very, very popular. And here you can see 3 examples of people who had shaping, sometimes they would say change, the memory of the world around the Holocaust through the Schindler List by Spielberg, Life is Beautiful by Benini. Most people around the world who know something about the Holocaust know something because they watched those films. The third example comes from Pablo Loren's movie, Jackie, which documents the first days following the JFK assassination and the kind of decisions Jackie Kennedy Onassis that few people really thought highly of her at the time. She had to make some decisions that really, really helped shaping his memory forever. And I will mention the most important decision she made, and Pablo Loren documents that in his movie, is her insistence on burying him in Arlington rather than in the family estate in Massachusetts. And think about the difference of placing him at the heart of this nation in Washington, D.C., in Arlington Cemetery, right? Not far from the mall, with all the monuments, versus placing him at the family estate in Boston. The fourth dimension is institutionalization. In order to make something remembered, we now can get some help from museums, from historical museums, from the fact that the memory is not dependent on volunteers, that sometimes they can remember, sometimes they can forget, and sometimes they just pass away. So if we can get the memory into a huge institution, and here are 2 examples of really state-of-the-art examples of historical museums. On the right side, you can see Polin, the Museum of the Jewish Community, of the history of the Jewish community in Poland, documenting what 1,000 years. It's an amazing museum, and I highly recommend to all of you to take a special trip to Warsaw, if only for this museum. The other side, on the left side, you can see the history and culture of African Americans, a museum around which there were 100 years of arguments. And it's not a coincidence that it was finally opened and materialized during Obama's term. So institutionalization is extremely important. But the most important dimension, in my opinion, is the culture of the commemorating society. And there are some things that better stick into a specific culture. And what you can see on the left side, and soon you will see on the right side another picture. What you see on the left side is a building that maybe some of you, I don't know how many of you have been to Tel Aviv and walked through Rothschild Boulevard. And Rothschild Boulevard, which used to be an extremely posh boulevard and now return to their glory days and maybe even have better days, kind of, it's very easy to ignore this home, but this home holds an extremely important story. This is where Ben Gurion announced read the Declaration of Independence on Hey Be'iyar, 1948, May 15. So the state of Israel was born here. But for reasons that are really, really beyond my talk, this building has been deteriorated, sort of neglected for 70 years. Now, by the way, it's been renovated, but this is a totally different talk that maybe one day I'll give another webinar on the puzzle, how we can explain that. But it's really, really important to understand that if, for example, there is a culture that cherishes death, and death is like its ethos and one of its organizing principles. So if you celebrate something that has to do only with life and livelihood and declarations and civil rituals, it may not stick too well and may explain how come this building is sort of neglected for so long. So basically, we are talking about 5 dimensions: time, space, agents of memory, institutionalization, and culture. And if you remember the 2 examples I started my lecture with, Anne Frank and Rosa Parks, all 5 dimensions are right there. Official time, official space, agents of memory, institutionalization, and culture. And that all together kind of can answer the puzzle. How can we explain that we remember the 2 of them? But collective memory, I always joke that collective memory is like marriage. If you don't work on it, it sort of fades away because it's very, very dynamic. And sometimes things are changing. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, he wasn't a very popular figure in America. He barely made the election some months before he was assassinated. It was a small margin that made him a president again. But 60 years after his assassination, when America faces the challenges of World War I and is looking for someone to give it inspiration and hope and to look up to, they found Abraham Lincoln. So the collective memory has changed with him. And in fact, during certain years, he sort of overshadowed the memory of the founding father of Washington. Another guy who still, his memory is sort of, not fixed, is the memory of Prime Minister Rabin. When Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, he wasn't popular among, I would say, half of the country. He's still not popular among half of the country, probably, but we need to wait probably a generation or more, and maybe Rabin will be our Abraham Lincoln. So it happened to Lincoln, it may happen to Rabin as well. As I said, collective memory is extremely dynamic. And let me give you an example. I don't know how many of you are in Chicago or New York, where Hamilton is being played. Lin-Manuel Miranda, a real genius, took a memory of someone who was extremely important in American history, but most young people have hardly heard of him, let alone know anything about him. And if they knew, maybe it was about the duel at the end of that ended actually his life. But due to this musical and the use of rap and the use of kind of music and the kind of words, the history of Hamilton is probably the most known one now in America among young generation. So memory can be changed maybe if we're using the right platform. Another change that may take place is that following The Crown, a British series that documents the life and choices made by the Queen. And when I look at this, and I just saw the season 3, I looked also at Prince Charles, and I have a feeling that by the end of this series, we may change the way we see him, and eventually the way we will remember him. And when we will go back and ask, what was the turning point in which we change our views of Prince Charles, I think that this mini-series, The Crown, has a lot to do with it. So the past is important. Let me just sum. But I want to make sure that we are not falling into the trap of becoming slaves of our past and just care about the past, because the present is extremely important, and no less important is our future. I want to thank you very much and tell you that if you are around on March 16, the Truman Institute for the Advancement of Peace is organizing a huge conference on peace and economy. Everything is going to be translated to English. Some of our major speakers are coming from English-speaking countries, and if you're around, you're more than welcome to come and say hi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we'll open the floor for questions. Again, if you have any, please type them into the Q&A box. And again, we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first one we have is, since you mentioned Hamilton, which is still clearly very popular in the country and touring all around, is what would you consider the role of music and how that could change memory, or how it could influence it?
This is an extremely interesting question that was very little researched around, but sometimes, first of all, music is something that we learn at a very early age, and songs that we learned at childhood stayed with us forever and ever. And through songs and through music, we can recall specific events. So sometimes when I say, what does it take to be remembered, I would look at the agents of memory. Some of them are the ones who, wrote the great music that later on we remember through specific events. So you're really lucky. We always, think about one of the undergrounds in Israel was an extremely important underground. But in addition to the real work that it did, which was like really important in winning major battles during the War of Independence, but part of the memory we have around them is that they had their own poets who wrote those great lyrics and stuff, and we remember them through that. So music has a really, really important part in making sure we remember. I don't know if that was the value of the question, but we do remember the past through popular songs, and some of them actually bring back memories of important events.
Great. Beth actually has a question. Beth, do you want to ask it yourself?
Sure. In reason number 5, you mentioned that the culture of the society and their rituals are important for collective memory. But I wasn't clear on that. Could you give a few examples or elaborate on that?
On the issue of culture?
Culture, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example, and I'll be, I would say, if I would compare American society and Israeli society, I know that it's not so easy to compare those societies because they're so different. First is size. Size makes a big difference when it comes to social stuff. But when I think about it, Americans don't see death as an organizing principle. And when they choose their Memorial Day, they would choose, for example, Lincoln's birthday, Washington's birthday. They want to mark it on the best date. Death is not as celebrated, if I can use that word, in the way Israeli culture mark it. And I think that it has also a lot to do with Judaism, because Zionism is based, even if it had those all kind of dreams, at its basic, there are major Jewish issues. And Jews, for example, don't care about birthday. Birthday is not a Jewish invention. Unlike the Sabbath, birthday is not a Jewish invention, because basically when a person is born, he or she didn't do anything in the world. So there is nothing to celebrate. But when someone dies, we have lots of respect towards your side, towards the best date. Now, put on that basis, Zionism. And you can see why every time in Israel, even if they'd like to evade certain issues, we will always mark the death date of someone rather than the birthday. When it comes to official days, even, you know, Mother's Day in Israel, now we don't have Mother's Day anymore, we have Family Day. So, but we used to have Mother's Day, and the day that was chosen for Mother's Day, not Memorial Day for the Holocaust, not Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers, not Memorial Day for anything, just Mother's Day, to appreciate what mothers are doing to us. And we used to make those nice jewelry. We thought it was nice. My mother couldn't sell them, but that was the present for Mother's Day. The day that was chosen was the death date of Henrietta Sold. Henrietta Sold was an American Zionist, an activist that brought kids who survived the Holocaust and so on, and really, really saved many lives. The day that was chosen to mark Mother's Day was not her birthday, was her death day, and we're talking about a heavy day. So when I look, and I'll be very brutal, but I'll say it clearly, one of the explanations to me is when I try to answer the puzzle of how come the place where the state was inaugurated has been neglected for 70 years, has to be with the fact that nobody died there. If somebody would die in that building, or if that building would be associated with war, it will be kept differently. If you go to Philadelphia and you look at the place where your nation has been inaugurated, it looks totally different.
Okay.
Okay. The next question is, you talked about America's commitment to the past and how when you go to DC, it's like a playground for you. Are there other countries that you think have the same sort of commitment to remembering the past?
Germany is an extremely interesting example. Certainly Berlin. Certainly Berlin is an extremely, this is yet another playground for me. It's a very, very interesting city in many ways, but it's a very interesting city that attempts to deal with its past and did a lot of work on the ground to commemorate the past. What I find really extremely fascinating about Berlin is that I feel in Berlin that there is this kind of struggle between two stories. In one story, Germans were the perpetrators. They were the bad guys, the Holocaust. And we see many monuments and museums, you know, the Jewish Museum and the huge monuments near the bridge, near not the bridge, in a minute it will come to me, the art there, and so on and so forth. At the same time, there is another story that gets more and more commemoration on the ground, and this is the story of the wall, of the Cold War, and how they felt victims of larger forces of communism. And it is kind of, and this is where they feel victims. And every time I go to Berlin, I find like two at least new museums. One has to do with the Holocaust, another one has to do with the wall. And there are a bunch of them and a lot of variations. So Germany in general did an extremely interesting work regarding commemorating the past, and unlike other nations, drew some lessons. And I think that it's not a coincidence that Germany in many ways was much better to refugees in the last decade than many other nations. And I think that their policy towards refugees had a lot to do with their memory of World War II and the Holocaust.
Okay. And then I think what we have is the last question is, how are the agents, let's talk about the 5 agents affecting memory. Let's say you don't have all 5 of them and you're missing 1 or 2. How does that affect the collective memory?
It's a great question. It's a great question. First of all, it's a little bit, it's a little bit, of course, tricky, but if I would have to give up something, I would give up the space. I would give up the space because it's hard to reach the space, the site, the memorial site. Sometimes you have to drive for hours. Sometimes you have to fly. You need money to get to those places. So I think that nowadays where we can have virtual, visits. Now, I don't think that virtual visits are as dramatic and as impact as to visit the actual place where we can stand there and say, here in this place, I still think that the time, if I would have to choose between time and space, I would choose time, because time can be brought to each and every corner. It's much harder to bring the space. So in that sense, I would give up space. Then I think that institutionalization is extremely important. Agents of memory are very important to initiate stuff. They're the ones who initiate. They're the ones who write the original text. But then, if they're volunteers and they get tired and they get old and they get interested in other things, what is going to happen to the memory? But if we have a law and we enforce it and we make schools remember each and every year a specific event, that's something that has a lot of impact. So if I would have to choose three, I would choose time, institutionalization, and culture.
That's great. This has been an incredibly enlightening morning, so thank you so much for joining us, Professor, and Beth, thank you as well. And thank you everyone for joining us to listen to the presentation. To learn more about how you can get involved with AFHU, the university, and the Alumni Association, please email us at alumni@afhu.org. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you again. Bye.